Hello everybody, welcome to the County Seat. I'm your host Chad Booth. Today we are going to talk about an application or a program that may have significant impact on how we value public land, federal land here in the state of Utah for purposes of county budgets. So we're going to start by finding out a little bit about what this program is, how it works, and who would benefit from it.
There are 54 million acres of land within the boundaries of Utah. 33 million of those acres are owned by the federal government. That federal ownership of the land creates a challenge for county budgets because local governments aren't able to tax the federal government as they do other property owners. The federal government created the Payment in Lieu of Tax, or PILT, to offset the loss in tax revenues due to federal lands within a county's boundaries. In Utah, that amounts to $41 million for about 33 million acres of federal land. Describing the challenges that creates for a community has been difficult because until recently, assembling the vast data sets that impact a particular parcel hasn't been an easy task. Jacob Muai, the Chief Operating Officer of AEON AI, gave a brief overview of what all that information looks like when it can be manipulated in real time versus staring at pages of spreadsheets.
What our software does is tell a story utilizing massive amounts of data. We're talking zoning information for all the cities, all the counties, algorithm variables that go into running a pro forma for how you even value land. There are dozens and dozens of data sets that we've been able to aggregate coming from the cities and counties, as well as publicly available market data for land valuation. In the case of PILT and the state of Utah, our tool was created in order to help them tell the story of 33 million acres of federal land.
Vast valleys of sagebrush or national parks are top of mind when we hear about public lands. Eventually, that federal land ownership bumps up against other boundaries. In some cases, that may end up in places where we don't typically expect to find public land, within a city.
What we've done for the state of Utah is understand how many of these acres actually exist within city boundaries. And we can show for the entire state, there's almost 218,000 acres that fall within city and county boundaries.
AEON AI allows policymakers to assemble the real data to see what the true valuation of the land is.
There's a federal parcel that is 20 acres right within the city boundaries within Utah County. As I zoom into it, you can see Mountain View Corridor. And so this federal parcel is not far from housing developments. So a county commissioner at Utah County can essentially click on any of the federal parcels within their jurisdiction and instantly understand what could we potentially tax this particular parcel of land. Just the dirt of the land, as well as if it was built out according to the existing zoning information. We can also see what is currently being paid in PILT from the federal government as they do their own analysis in valuing land, where for this 20-acre parcel, they're paying around $55 in PILT when the tax equivalent of this 20-acre parcel is around $13,000.
The ability to demonstrate different scenarios involving PILT empowers elected officials with a much stronger case to present to Congress each year when they ask for money to be appropriated to the program. In this case, it presents real market data to back up the claim that the $1.24 average paid per acre in Utah doesn't represent tax equivalency. 1,850 counties receive PILT nationwide. Each of those communities likely has a different story to tell. Policymakers in Utah are using AEON AI to look more closely at the data and what different scenarios could mean for their communities. For the county seat, I'm Derek Dowsett.
Thanks, Derek. We now have an understanding of what this program is. We will come back and talk about its applications and some of its potentials with our panel of experts on the county seat. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the county seat. We are having a conversation about AEON, and it's AEON AI. We're going to find out a little bit more about how the genesis of this came to be and how it might change the way we look at federal funding, particularly in PILT and SRS here in the state of Utah. Joining us for the conversation, a commissioner from Paiute County, who should know a lot about both SRS and PILT, Darren Bushman. One of the pioneers of public land issues, former Representative Ken Ivory, who is with AEON, and Kevin Stratton, who is now the standard bearer for public land issues in the legislature from District 48. Thank you all for joining us. So I think we should probably start this, Ken, with you. What's the genesis behind this?
You know, Chad, it's a great story. About 3 years ago, I was sitting in a Natural Resources Committee hearing with Jim DeBackus. And we've had a lot of fun with Jim, but you know, politically, we probably are pretty far apart ideologically. And I said, Jim, you know, we're probably going to differ forever on who should manage or control public lands. But as long as the federal government controls the land, don't you think they should treat our kids and communities fairly? And Jim turns to me and says, I know, right? And Chad, I thought he was putting me on. I said, are you serious? He's like, no, I'm totally serious. He says, federal government can't be a deadbeat landowner. They have to pay their fair share. And you know, it occurred to me, Chad, in 50 years from the Payment in Lieu of Taxes Act, where the federal government said, we commit to pay the tax equivalent amount for the lands that are non-taxable, we've never determined what that was. And I said, Jim, I got an idea. What do you think about working on some legislation together to determine the fair taxable value of the federal lands? And so in 2018, we did House Bill 357 and House Concurrent Resolution 19 together. It was I mean, you can appreciate this. It was co-sponsored by every member of the House on both sides of the aisle and passed the House and Senate unanimously to determine the fair taxable value of the federal lands. And that's really how this all got started. I get a call from this company and they said, we think we can help you. We have technology that can look at every unique acre of federal land and determine value on a mass appraisal system. But to get down to the unique characteristics, not just an extrapolation of information, but to look at the unique characteristics of every acre of 33 million acres. So we think we can help you. And that kind of opened up our eyes that maybe there's technology that can do this. And so at the state level, we threw that out publicly and said, okay, what else is there out there that's like this? And are there ways to look at running valuation of these? And that started an RFP process and a public invitation process. And AEON, at the time, the name was Geomancer, and now AEON AI ultimately won the RFP and then did a prototype for Washington County and then did the contract for the whole state.
So, Kevin, how is this, I mean, from the legislative standpoint, you guys, you know, backed the resolution and the RFP came in. Obviously, there's a little bit of funding for it. Why is this of value to the state?
You look at the challenges we face as a state to be fiscally responsible, live within our means. It's a real challenge when you take 2/3 of the property out of the picture for any sort of revenue. And so certainly that was the recognition back in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, leading up to the passage of PILT. The PILT that was a companion, Payment in Lieu of Taxes, was a companion piece of legislation went along with FLPMA, Federal Public Lands Management Act. And the whole notion was, look, if we're going to retain the lands, we need to make sure that we have tax equivalency. And a recent resolution we passed in the state of Utah acknowledged tax equivalency was just quoting the narrative and the legislative intent and language of that time. Tax equivalency means the amount that would have been received by the jurisdictions if federal lands were privately owned. Well, what happens is you put Utah on equal footing with the other states east of Colorado. Mm-hmm. You know, literally, if you're a family living in the eastern United States, you move to the west, Utah, for example, or other states here in the west, you lose rights. You lose the ability to have the funding sources that are available for funding education, essential governmental services, and really impact our quality of life. And so the whole notion is, what would it mean to the state of Utah the taxpayers and the burden and providing the governmental services, education, funding, quality of life if you had billions of more dollars of revenue coming in on these lands. Currently, we only tax 21% of our lands in the state of Utah with private that are privately owned. And then you have institutions, so forth, that are non-taxable. Then you have this great swath of over 67% that are not taxed. And so it's a tremendous, tremendous benefit to the citizens, the children of this state, to be able to have fair treatment and have that commitment back in 1976 fulfilled in terms of providing tax equivalency as payments in lieu of taxes.
We'll be right back with the county seat. Welcome back to the county seat. We are talking about AEON AI today and an application. If you've missed it, plan to go online and watch this show again so you can get up to speed. Darren, I got a question for you. You, as a county commissioner, and the entire time you've been in here, you have struggled with the issue of SRS and PILT and getting fair compensation for your county. Do you think this could be a game changer for you?
Absolutely, Chad. It's interesting. I was going back through some notes, and we were looking in 2014. We were trying to figure out how do we come up with the fair taxable value of our lands. And we had our assessor undertake a massive effort to evaluate what those lands would look like. And back then we were doing it, it's all by paper, and we were a lot of wild guesses and other things. But even then, in 2014, we come up with nearly $3 million, over $3 million in tax that we should be getting in Paiute County, and we get $270,000 in PILT. On top of the fact that we have had short payment PILT years where it wasn't fully funded, and we've had years where they didn't actually fund it until after the budget year was over. So yeah, it could be a total game changer.
If this program works, how do you get the federal government to take it seriously?
Well, good information, accurate data leads to good decisions, good policy. And so we've begun a dialogue. One of the remarkable things that took place as we inventoried the land, approximately 34 million acres of land within Utah, is we found that inside our cities and towns, inside the 249 cities and towns boundaries, there's over 217,000 acres of federally managed public lands. That's that figure alone just is it's a jaw dropper. And so traditionally, those acreages inside the cities and towns have been certainly a no-brainer. One of our federal delegates said, first of all, the federal government doesn't know they have them. Second of all, they don't want them. And third, it makes complete sense, nonpartisan efforts to get those where they need to be for
so somebody use. Would look at this and they go, okay, yeah, sure, there's going to be federal holdings. They own the federal building on State Street in First South, and they hold this piece of property, and they've got Hill Air Force Base. Of course they're going to have 217,000. You're just talking about raw land. Is that it?
Raw land.
See, that's the beauty of the program is the policymakers direct the scenarios and the assumptions, but that's just BLM and Forest Service land. Right, so just raw BLM Forest Service land, 217,000 acres in the middle of city boundaries. And so if you take the lowest use, the lowest taxable value for the lowest unimproved use within cities, that's $131 million just there. That's 0.4% of the land in the state. And that's $131 million versus $40 million in PILT. And then, Chad, there's a combined 659,000 acres within 1 mile of the cities. So that's about 1.2% of all the land in the state, 659,000 acres. And again, if you take the unimproved, lowest taxable value on that, that's $358 million instead of $40 million in PILT. So just looking at the smallest fraction of the land just dwarfs what the state is getting in PILT. But the beauty of having a program like this now is you can look at those unique characteristics and say, show me the BLM land, show me just the Forest Service land, show me these other parcels, and let's take those out. What if we were to actually have the ability to do some economic development? Simulate that. What if we did just the lowest taxable value through the whole state? Let's simulate that. And it's almost like a flight simulator where you can run all sorts of valuation scenarios, and now you can have the conversation with real data to say, you promised tax equivalency, This is what it's costing in teachers. This is what it's costing in textbooks. This is what it's costing in, in the ability to fund education essential services.
And the sad part about this, Chad, through the identification of those lands, one of the things that they've identified is a lot of those lands are not being managed at all by the federal agency, and in fact they're homes for illegal dumping and public nuisances because the federal government has no control over it. In Beaver City, they own basically the south exit of Beaver, south of the exit. And what's out there? Big slabs of concrete where people are illegally dumping and disposing of refuge and all of that stuff. So that stuff, it's just not right the way it's being managed, first of all, but the fact that it's in city limits and should be used for development.
We've talked about this for 10 years on this program. And as we talk about it, we talk, well, they're not funding us, they're giving us a fraction, now they're going to fully fund it. One would think that we would be doing better, on a per capita or a per acre basis, that we would be actually doing better. Are we?
We'll give you an example. When we started this discussion 10 years ago, we were $2.2 billion below average in per pupil funding for education. In fact, that's what started this whole thing. I mean, we're in the legislature, that's the discussion, that we can't fund education. We're $2 billion below average. We thought we've got to figure out something where we've got 65% non-taxable land. Well, because the land values are increasing so rapidly in other places, and PILT is not tied to the value of the land at all, Chad, and it's based on a consumer price index increase. So now that $2.2 billion that we were below average, we're now $3.4 billion below average in 8 years. And it's going to keep getting worse because we're not denominated the same way that other states that tax and fund education essential services from the increasing value of the land. PILT isn't based on the value of the land at all. So now we can have that discussion with real numbers in real time and say, look, this is what it means to communities every single day.
One thing I look at is in 2019, we received just a little bit less than $42 million in PILT across the state. This year, 2020, we are expected to receive just a little bit over $39 million. And so actually we're receiving less in 2020 than we are in 2019. And answer your question directly, is it getting better? Across the nation, there is $514 million allocated for PILT payments. And again, there's public lands, publicly managed lands across the nation, every state. So this just is not a Utah issue.
No, but it's a huge issue.
As we address
here.
this issue, the rising tide. But an interesting statistic is there's over $12.2 billion of revenue that our federal government is receiving on oil and minerals, and the revenues coming from this. And so what we're talking about is, look, let's have a realistic approach here. If the land is bearing it, the land can bear it. Of course, we love and cherish our public lands. We want to, that's not the issue. We're a public land state. We want to continue to be a public land state. It's one of our big attractions and quality of life here in the state of Utah. But where it's generating over $12 billion, why can't you make the argument, look, take half. Take 50% of the revenue that's generating and let's give it back to the states for essential governmental services, education, the things that we want to do that we all can agree on that government should be involved in and taking care of, roads and infrastructure and the like.
And Chad, if I could, the really good thing about this now, I mean, we've gone a lot of different directions on public land policy and trying to figure out the right answer. And at the state level, you stay in the room and you keep talking. At the federal level, maybe they can have an issue and keep beating each other over the head. But these are our neighbors in our neighborhoods. And at the state level, we stayed in the room, we kept talking about this, and we came to a place where Republicans and Democrats are completely on board. This has nothing to do with control and management of the land. It's about the promise the federal government made that said, look, if we take these lands off the tax rolls, we're going to hold your children and your communities harmless and pay the tax equivalent amount. And we've never figured out what that is. In over 50 years, we're getting about $1 an acre on PILT. You'd pay $1 an acre for your property tax, wouldn't you?
Yeah, oh yeah. Wow.
And so that $1 an acre, it's time to just determine, hey, federal government, this is your promise, and here's the value of that promise, and our kids and communities deserve to have that promise complied with.
You're watching the County Seat. We're talking about PILT, SRS, and a program to finally get our fair share. Welcome back to the county seat. We're talking about AEON AI and its implications for rural counties being able to finally get their fair share of PILT. Is this really doable, or are we going to end up in court fighting this for years with the federal government?
Well, it's an easy court case if we end up there, but through the process of legislation and good policy based on sound principle, it's doable. We don't have to increase taxes to do this. There's a revenue source coming already built in place with the lands that's taking place, and so I think it's very doable if the will is there and we have the good information, good principle-based decisions.
I sat on the Western Interstate Regional Board. Ken recently presented this to the Western Interstate states, and there's a ton of excitement in the West. And I think as the coalition builds and they continue to see what's capable, I think there's real potential that the federal government's going to have to answer the call from these Western states when they get on board with what we can actually provide.
Yeah, we've got a structural imbalance, Chad. I mean, we've only got 21% taxable land, and that's becoming even more intense. We saw with all the tax reform and things going on, it's going to continue to get more and more intense. And the real question, going back to Zig Ziglar, right? You gotta wanna. And if you wanna, do we deserve to have a promise? The federal government said we're gonna pay tax equivalency. We now can figure that out. We never could before. We now know what that is, and we know what it costs the classrooms and what it costs the communities. And so it really is up to us to stand up and say we deserve to have that promise honored. And it's a good thing that it's a united bipartisan effort to get there.
What a great way to end this conversation. Gentlemen, thank you so much. Kevin, it's always good to see you. I don't see you very much anymore. Ken, I haven't seen you for a while.
Good to see you, Chad.
Sharon, I
Pleasure.
see you all the time, but I enjoy it nonetheless. Thank you for inviting us into your homes each week for the county seat. This is a really important show. It's on social media, so please go find it on YouTube, go find it on Facebook, like us, follow us, and share it with your friends. Everybody needs to hear about it. We'll see you next week on the county seat. Thank you for watching the County Seat. Be sure to subscribe and turn on your notifications to keep up to date on the program and happenings around Utah.